Good afternoon, everyone. It is Angie here once again with Afternoon STEM at the Headwaters Science Center. And today I'm going to be talking about eggs, kind of with the theme of this wonderful book we read on Wednesday called I Hatched, about a fabulous little bird who popped out of its egg and kind of got on with being a curious, wonderful new baby. So, with that, we're going to talk about eggs. Now, there's all kinds of different eggs. Now, if you think about it, we've got fish lay eggs. Many insects, probably all insects, lay eggs. Amphibians lay eggs. Snakes, lizards, they lay eggs. Birds, of course, we know birds lay eggs. And there are two kinds of eggs. So you kind of have like your simple early style egg, and then you have your more complicated eggs. So originally, way back hundreds of millions of years ago, all eggs were basically just little globs of life material kind of encapsulated in sort of a gelatinous, gooey capsule. So not really a shell, but it kept everything all together. But those eggs had to stay wet. So they had to be laid in water. So things like fish and amphibians like frogs always had to stay near a place of water, at least to lay their eggs, which is fine. But that means you're always going to be tied to that spot if you need to reproduce. Now, some point, well, we know what point, eggs got a little fancier. They got a shell. And so when eggs got fancy, so to speak, we call those amniotic eggs. So there's two kinds of eggs, basically. You've got amniotic, and you've got the opposite, which is anamniotic. So an anamniotic, or non-amniotic egg, is something like a fish or a frog that has that gelatinous capsule, not a true shell, and it has to stay wet in order to survive. Now, eventually, evolution happened, and eggs became shelled. They had a protective covering, and that protective covering, while protecting the embryo, also helped to keep the egg wet. And so eggs did not have to be laid near water or in water. All right. So one thing we're going to do today is we are going to settle the age-old question of which came first, the chicken or the egg. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just going to show you, I don't know if this is going to show up very well, but these are some unhatched corn snake eggs. Let's see, these were preserved July 29th, 1999, which is kind of cool. And these are amniotic eggs, so that means they have a protective shell, but snake eggs are not like chicken eggs with that hard shell that you crack, right? These are sort of soft and leathery, but they still perform the same function. They still keep the embryo nice and warm, or nice and protected, and nice and wet. All right. Ooh, we got a big egg. All right, so evolutionarily speaking, the very first shelled egg, what we call an amniotic egg, that showed up in the fossil record about 325 million years ago. Now, chickens, as we know them, they showed up, it kind of depends on the archaeological evidence and where we draw the line of a domesticated chicken and a wild chicken and what came before the wild chicken. But chickens showed up somewhere between 10,000 and 58,000 years ago. So, visually speaking, eggs showed up way down here. This is early time. And chickens didn't show up till way up here. So
this is specifically amniotic eggs, right?
Right, yep. So, the egg definitely predates the chicken. Now, if we want to get philosophical, maybe we aren't talking about the egg in general, but we want to know what came first, the chicken or the chicken's egg. And some scientists at Sheffield University in the UK, they studied proteins And by studying those proteins, they found one called OC17. And that protein is what is responsible for putting the chicken's egg together, so to speak. And so because that protein only exists in a chicken's ovary, that means that the chicken egg had to have come before the chicken. So to put it another way, two wild jungle fowl, what we call Gallus gallus, were mated, and they've been mating and mating and mating, and at some point a young bird was born that was genetically different enough from those Gallus gallus to be a separate species that we would call now Gallus gallus domesticus or something like that. And so if you want to be philosophical and talk about like physical production of the egg in the system, then you could make the argument that, okay, then the chicken does come first. So it depends on what question you ask, how specific you ask, whether or not, which came first, the chicken or the egg. So here I have some more eggs in a jar, and these are pretty small. These are common European quail or Coturnix quail eggs, and these are very small. Coturnix quail are very small. When they're born, they're just itty bitty little poofs of feathers. Right? This big fella is, I'm assuming, an ostrich. Okay, so this is an ostrich egg, and you can see it's been hollowed out. It's pretty heavy. It's nice and smooth. But this is a very large egg, especially if we compare it to our tiny little quail egg. Alright.
The biggest egg currently being produced.
Alright, good to know. The largest egg currently produced on planet Earth. But still, for as big as an ostrich is, that's a pretty small egg. That thing comes out pretty tiny. I'm surprised. Alright, I digress. Alright, so because I knew we were going to be talking about eggs, I dug out one of my favorite pieces of, well, I think it's artistic. I think it's art. This is an antique model of the stages of eggs, of chicken eggs, okay? So right here, this is the guts, so to speak, the ovaries. So this is what it looks like inside. You have all these little tiny things that are going to kind of come into being, be an egg. And as it goes through these long tubes and tunnels, calcium is added to the outside, and it grows and it gets bigger and it gets more shell until finally that egg is laid. And if we look here, we can watch the development. So the very first day that the egg is laid, it looks like an egg that we see at the grocery store when you crack it open. Second day, it really doesn't look a whole lot different. But here by the fifth day, you might be able to see it looks like a little, I don't know, it kind of looks like a little bug in there. And it probably wouldn't happen at the grocery store, but I have bought eggs. I didn't buy them, I got them from my uncle. And every once in a while you'll get one and it was a little too far along, or they didn't candle it very well. And so sometimes you can see stuff in there. And so by 1 week you can see it's gotten a little bigger. That little black blob is the eye spot, or what will eventually be the eyeball. And the yolk, the yellow stuff in here, is basically food for the growing embryo. So it doesn't have to eat or anything like that. It gets all the nutrients from that yolk. The air, oxygen and things like that is able to diffuse through the shell, so it just sort of comes in. All right, so we're moving along. By 2 weeks, it's getting pretty obvious. And next here, what they have is what they did is they took the embryo out of the shell and just sort of laid it out flat. So these and these are about the same stage. 15 days, it's actually kind of starting to look like a chicken. 17 days, it's hard to see because there's that kind of a shield or glass over it, but it's getting bigger. So here's the 17th day chick, as if it had been taken out of the egg and just sort of laid there. You can see the chick is much bigger, and the egg yolk, that yolk sac, has become much smaller because the embryo is using it. And here we're growing, and there we are, 20 days. And so it takes about 3 weeks for a baby chicken to hatch, as long as everything's going well. they pop out fluffy and adorable. And these things down here are basically reconstructions of these ones up here, but they've been enlarged. So this one is 50 hours, which is pretty close to 2 days. If we were to take that yolk and spread it out and put it under a microscope, you would be able to see this. And you can see the little network of blood vessels and things like that. This one is the 7-day embryo, way up in the corner, enlarged. And then this is that same embryo enlarged again. You can see how big it is relative to all that other stuff. So, next time you're at the grocery store, next time you're gonna make some scrambled eggs or have some chicken tendies, as much as you probably maybe don't even want to, I hope you think of this. All right, so if there are no questions or comments or anything like that, that's all I have for our discussion of eggs. Remember, the Science Center is open 7 days a week. Monday through Saturday, we are open 9:30 to 5. Sundays, we're open 1 to 5. Tomorrow is snake feeding, so if you're around, or if you're not around, you can check it out online at 3:30 every day. All right, so